My mother looked me dead in the eye across the Thanksgiving table, her hand trembling with rage, and threw a ceramic gravy boat straight at my head. It shattered against the vintage wallpaper, splattering hot brown grease across my designer silk blouse. "You are the absolute shame of this family!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the sudden dead silence of 20 extended relatives. I felt the hot liquid seeping into my collar, burning my skin, but I did not blink. I simply reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the encrypted titanium flash drive that held the power to send her precious golden child to federal prison. Before I tell you how this holiday dinner ended in the total financial destruction of my toxic family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to choose between protecting your peace and protecting people who actively try to ruin you. I am Blair, 35 years old and a senior forensic accountant for one of the top corporate firms in Chicago. Growing up in our sprawling Tudor-style home in the wealthy northern suburbs, I learned early on that love was entirely transactional. My mother, Diane, cared only about country club appearances, maintaining the illusion of old money perfection and worshipping my younger sister. To the outside world, this Thanksgiving dinner was a flawless display of familial warmth. The grand mahogany table was laden with expensive catered food, crystal wine glasses, caught the ambient light of the chandelier, and my aunts and uncles were dressed in expensive cashmere. But the reality was a rotting facade, and I was about to tear it all down. The silence in the dining room was deafening. My Aunt Susan froze with a silver butter knife halfway to her dinner roll. My Uncle Richard stared intently at his plate, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. No one moved to help me. No one ever did when Diane went on the warpath. "How dare you sit at my table and disrespect your sister?" Diane shrieked. Her face flushed a dark, angry red. "After everything this family has given you, after we took you in when nobody else in the world wanted you." I grabbed a heavy linen cloth napkin and calmly dabbed at the grease staining my collar, keeping my breathing perfectly measured. I did not disrespect Savannah Diane. I refused to commit federal tax fraud for her. There is a massive legal difference between being unsupportive and refusing to be an accomplice to a felony. My younger sister Savannah sat at the opposite end of the table, sipping her expensive Chardonnay with a smug manufactured pout. At 31 years old, Savannah was the undisputed golden child of the family. She ran a supposedly thriving luxury organic skincare brand that Diane bragged about to anyone who would listen at her tennis club. Her husband Andre, a tall, incredibly smooth-talking African-American man who always wore custom-tailored Italian suits and drove a leased imported sports car, sat right next to her. He was rubbing her shoulder in a show of faux solidarity, playing the part of the devoted, highly successful husband perfectly. They had come to me 2 weeks ago, begging for my professional help to prepare their corporate tax filings before an impending IRS audit. Because I mistakenly still valued the concept of family loyalty, I agreed to look at their books free of charge. But when I actually gained access to their ledgers, I found a financial massacre that made my stomach turn. Savannah had not sold a single unit of inventory in 8 months. Her warehouse was full of expired products. Instead of admitting defeat, she had been artificially inflating her revenue by taking out massive high-interest business loans, using Diane's retirement accounts as collateral. Even worse, she was siphoning that cash directly into Andre's personal offshore accounts to fund their lavish lifestyle while simultaneously stealing from Andre's own private investor funds to cover her tracks. It was a chaotic, highly illegal mess of wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. I laid the cold, hard facts out plainly for the entire table to hear my voice steady and devoid of the hysterical emotion Diane was displaying. "Savannah, your company is completely insolvent. You have forged wholesale purchase orders, you have lied about your overhead costs, and you want me to put my hard-earned CPA license on the line by signing my name to a fraudulent tax return. The federal government is not going to care about your polished Instagram follower count when they realize you have embezzled $500,000. Savannah slammed her wine glass down on the table. The delicate crystal stem snapped in half, but she did not even flinch. You are a jealous liar, Blair. You have always been jealous of my success of my marriage, of the fact that Mom actually loves me and wants me around. She leaned forward, pointing a heavily manicured finger at me across the lavish spread of food. You sit in your boring little cubicle crunching numbers all day completely alone, and you cannot stand that I have a real, vibrant life. So you made up this ridiculous, complicated story with big financial words to ruin my Thanksgiving and make yourself look smart to the rest of the family. Diane immediately rushed to Savannah's defense, abandoning her seat at the head of the table to stand protectively behind her golden child. Do not listen to a word she says, sweetheart, Diane cooed, stroking Savannah's blonde hair before turning her venomous, hateful glare back on me. You are nothing but a bitter, ungrateful charity case, Blair. We gave you a beautiful home. We fed you the absolute best food. We clothed you when you were nothing but an abandoned piece of trash left in the foster system, and this is exactly how you repay us, by trying to destroy your sister's beautiful life out of pure spite and jealousy. The words hit me hard, a familiar dull ache blooming in the center of my chest, but I absolutely refused to let them see me bleed. The fact that I was adopted was always Diane's favorite, most sharpened weapon. Whenever I achieved anything in life, like graduating at the top of my university class or getting promoted to senior partner at the firm, she claimed it was solely due to the excellent environment she so graciously provided. But whenever I stepped out of line or established a basic personal boundary, I was suddenly the defective orphan carrying bad genetics who should be begging on my knees for scraps of their affection. I stood up from my chair, the heavy wooden legs scraping loudly against the expensive hardwood floor. My appetite was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, sharp mental clarity. The room felt suffocating, filled with the heavy scent of roasted turkey and expensive designer perfume. I am not trying to destroy her life, Diane. She already did that herself with her own greed and incompetence. And I am certainly not going to let her drag me down to a federal prison cell with her. Get another accountant. I am completely done with this charade. I turned to walk toward the main hallway to grab my winter coat from the closet, wanting nothing more than to leave this toxic nightmare behind and drive back to my quiet, safe apartment in the city. I did not want their money, their forced approval, or their fake holiday cheer. I just wanted out. But the sound of heavy, urgent footsteps rushing behind me made me stop dead in my tracks. Andre had pushed his chair back violently, striding around the large dining table with a dark, genuinely threatening look in his eyes. He purposefully blocked my path to the doorway, his tall frame towering over me in an attempt to use his physical presence to intimidate me into submission. The smooth, charming persona he usually wore for the family was completely gone, entirely replaced by raw, desperate panic. "You are not going anywhere, Blair," Andre said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register that the rest of the family at the table could barely hear. He stepped closer, invading my personal space until I had to tilt my head back just to look him in the eye. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath, mixed with the undeniable scent of fear. "Savannah said you made a secure copy of all our financial records. You downloaded everything from the cloud. You put them on a flash drive. I know you carry it with you because you are completely paranoid about data security." I held my ground, keeping my breathing perfectly even despite the massive rush of adrenaline flooding my veins. "Move out of my way right now, Andre." He did not budge an inch. His dark eyes darted toward the pocket of my slacks where the heavy metal of the encrypted USB drive rested, holding all the digital evidence of his financial crimes. That drive contains proprietary company information and highly sensitive personal data. He hissed, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked rapidly in his cheek. "You do not have the legal right to take it out of this house. Hand it over right now, Blair. We are not asking you nicely anymore. We are telling you." Diane's voice suddenly cut through the heavy tension from across the room, shrill, commanding, and utterly devoid of maternal warmth. "Do exactly what he says, Blair. Give your brother-in-law his property back immediately, or I swear to God I will call the police right this second and tell them you came into my home and stole from our family business." I looked around at the 20 silent faces of my supposed family. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, people I had known for over 3 decades. Not a single person spoke up to defend me or tell Andre to back off. They just watched with wide, fascinated eyes as Andre reached out his large hand, gripping my upper arm hard enough to leave deep bruises. I yanked my arm out of Andre's grip with enough force to make him stumble back a half step. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my voice remained dead calm. "If you touch me again, Andre, I will press assault charges before the IRS even gets a chance to look at your fake ledgers." Andre's eyes widened. For a split second, the polished country club facade cracked, revealing the desperate cornered man underneath. But before he could lunge at me again, Diane intervened. She marched across the dining room, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She did not look like a mother trying to keep the peace. She looked like a predator who had finally found an excuse to eliminate a threat. "You ungrateful little wretch," she spat, grabbing me by the shoulders. "You are done in this family. You are done in this house." With surprising strength, she shoved me toward the entryway. I stumbled, my bare arms feeling the sudden draft from the hallway. I reached out to grab my wool coat from the coat rack, but Diane was faster. She snatched my coat and my leather handbag, which contained my phone, my wallet, and my car keys. "You do not get to take anything paid for by the family you are trying to destroy," Diane snarled, holding the bag out of my reach. "My phone and my keys are in there, Diane," I said, trying to grab the strap of my bag. "I bought those with my own money. I pay my own bills. You know that." "Prove it," Savannah chimed in from the dining room, a vicious smirk playing on her lips. "Let her walk, Mom. Let her see how far she gets without us." Diane shoved me backward again, this time hard enough that my heels slipped on the marble foyer. The heavy oak front door was wide open. Outside, the freezing November rain was coming down in sheets, whipping violently against the porch lights. The temperature had plummeted since I arrived, and the wind was howling through the bare trees. "Get out!" Diane screamed, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "Get out and do not ever come back! You are dead to us!" She shoved me one final time right out the door. I stumbled onto the wet concrete of the porch, scraping my knee against the rough stone. Before I could even turn around to demand my bag, the heavy oak door slammed shut in my face. The loud, decisive click of the deadbolt echoed over the sound of the pouring rain. I stood on the porch for a full minute, completely stunned. The icy rain instantly soaked through my thin silk blouse, plastering my hair to my face and sending violent shivers down my spine. The temperature was hovering right above freezing. My breath plumed in the air as white mist. I pounded my fist against the thick wood of the door. "Diane, give me my keys. You cannot leave me out here. It is freezing." The only answer was the faint sound of laughter coming from the dining room window. They were actually laughing. They were sitting in there, eating warm turkey and drinking expensive wine, while I froze on the porch. The sheer cruelty of it punched the breath out of my lungs. I backed away from the house, wrapping my arms tightly around myself. I had to get out of there. I lived 40 miles away in a downtown high-rise. I had no phone to call a cab, no money to pay for one, and no coat to survive a long walk. I started walking down the long, winding driveway of the wealthy suburban neighborhood. The streetlights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the wet pavement. My designer heels were not made for walking in a storm, and within minutes my feet were completely numb. Every gust of wind felt like tiny knives slicing into my skin. The cold was becoming dangerous. I needed to find a phone. I needed to call the police. I trudged up the driveway of the house next door. It belonged to the Hendersons, a retired couple who had lived next to Diane for 20 years. I had watered their plants when they went on vacation. I had baked them cookies. I knew they were home because their 2 cars were parked in the driveway. I dragged myself onto their porch and rang the doorbell. Through the glass panels, I could see the warm glow of their living room. A television was playing a football game. The porch light flicked on. Mr. Henderson peered through the peephole. I raised my hand, shivering uncontrollably, mouthing the word help. I pointed to the pouring rain, and then to Diane's house, silently begging him to just open the door enough to hand me a phone. I saw his eyes widen in recognition. He looked from me to Diane's house next door and back to me. He knew exactly what had happened. Everyone in this neighborhood knew Diane's temper, but they also knew her immense power on the local homeowners association and the country club board. Nobody crossed Diane without facing severe social and financial repercussions in this tight-knit, wealthy community. Slowly, deliberately, Mr. Henderson reached up and pulled the heavy curtain closed over the glass panel. The porch light clicked off. My stomach dropped. The reality of my situation crashed over me like a physical weight. Diane had completely isolated me. She had spent decades building her reputation as the saintly adoptive mother dealing with a troubled, ungrateful orphan. Now, when I actually needed help, nobody was going to cross her to save me. They would rather watch me freeze on their doorstep than risk Diane's wrath. I was completely alone. I turned back to the street, forcing my numb legs to keep moving. I would have to walk to the main highway 2 miles away and try to flag down a passing state trooper. Every step sent a jolt of pain up my calves. The freezing rain began turning into sleet, bouncing off my shoulders and stinging my face. I was shivering so violently my teeth were audibly chattering. My muscles were starting to lock up. I had made it about half a mile down the dark, deserted residential road. My vision was starting to blur from the cold. I was focusing entirely on putting one foot in front of the other, repeating the numbers of my bank accounts in my head, just to keep my analytical mind sharp and prevent panic from taking over entirely. Suddenly, the blinding glare of headlights washed over me from behind. I turned around, shielding my eyes against the intense beam. The vehicle was moving way too fast for a residential street. I stepped onto the wet grass of the shoulder, waving my arms frantically, praying they would stop and at least let me use their dashboard phone to call a cab. The car did not just stop. It aggressively swerved toward me. Tires shrieked against the wet asphalt. A massive jet-black luxury SUV slammed on its brakes, cutting off my path completely and trapping me against a tall brick retaining wall. Before I could even process the danger or attempt to run, the rear passenger doors flew open. 2 large men wearing dark suits stepped out into the rain. They moved with terrifying, practiced precision. One grabbed my left arm, the other grabbed my right. I tried to scream, but the cold had stolen my voice. I kicked out wildly, my heel connecting with a solid shin, but the men did not even flinch. They lifted me clean off the ground with terrifying ease and shoved me roughly into the back seat of the SUV. The doors slammed shut instantly, cutting off the howling sound of the storm. The locks clicked loudly. I scrambled backward across the plush leather seats, my heart hammering in my throat. I looked up, ready to fight for my life, bracing myself for whatever terrible fate awaited me. But the person sitting across from me was not a kidnapper. It was a woman. She looked to be in her late 50s, wearing an impeccably tailored charcoal gray designer suit. Her posture was rigidly perfect, radiating an aura of immense quiet power. She had sharp cheekbones, pale skin, and piercing, calculating blue eyes that felt strangely, terrifyingly familiar. She did not look at the men in the front seat. She just looked at me, taking in my soaked, shivering form with a mixture of intense scrutiny and deep, undeniable anger. But the anger was not directed at me. She reached onto the seat beside her, picked up a thick, heated cashmere blanket, and draped it carefully over my trembling shoulders. I stared at her, too stunned to speak, too cold to process what was happening. The woman leaned forward, her voice low, smooth, and laced with absolute, unshakable authority. "Do not be scared, dear. I am your biological mother." I stared at her, my mind instantly rejecting the statement. Forensic accountants do not believe in miraculous coincidences, and we certainly do not believe in tearful, dramatic reunions. We believe in cold, hard facts, verifiable data, and clear motives. My analytical brain immediately went into survival mode, scanning the interior of the vehicle to assess the immediate threat level. The doors had child locks engaged, indicated by the small red indicator lights near the handles. The windows were heavily tinted and thick, likely reinforced or bulletproof, given the massive size of the SUV. I slipped my hand down to the seatbelt buckle, calculating how quickly I could unlatch it, wrap the heavy nylon strap around my fist, and use the solid metal clip to smash the passenger side glass. "Unlock these doors right now, or I will take the metal prongs from this headrest and shatter your window," I said. My voice was completely devoid of the raw terror I was actually feeling. I kept my posture rigid and my eyes locked onto hers. "I do not know what kind of scam you are running, or if my brother-in-law Andre hired you to intimidate me into handing over his financial records, but kidnapping is a federal offense. I am a senior corporate investigator. People know exactly where I am, and my firm has my location pinged every hour." The woman did not flinch. She did not look insulted or alarmed by my aggressive threat. Instead, a genuine razor-sharp smile spread across her face. "You have my temper," she said, her tone laced with deep, undeniable approval. "And you clearly have my analytical mind. I appreciate your fire, Blair. Most people would be crying or begging in your position. But I assure you I have absolutely no idea who Andre is, other than the fact that public records show he is currently drowning in high-interest debt. I am not here to hurt you. I am here to arm you." She reached into a sleek leather briefcase resting near her expensive designer heels and pulled out a thick, securely bound corporate dossier. She held it out to me. "I do not expect you to blindly believe a stranger who just pulled you into a car in the middle of a rainstorm," she continued calmly. "Look at the first page." I hesitated. My fingers were still numb from the freezing rain, and my wet silk blouse was clinging uncomfortably to my shivering skin. But my professional curiosity overrode my basic survival instincts. I took the heavy binder and flipped open the cover. The first document was a certified laboratory report from one of the most prestigious genetic testing facilities in the country. It was a comprehensive DNA profile comparison. I am trained to spot fraudulent documents, forged signatures, and digitally altered watermarks. I scanned the heavy paper, checking the notary stamps, the barcode indexing, and the lab director's signature. It had all the hallmarks of a legitimate, legally binding medical record. I looked at the final conclusion printed at the bottom of the page. The results were explicitly clear. There was a 99.9% genetic match between the woman sitting across from me listed as Caroline and myself. "How did you even get my DNA?" I demanded, my voice finally shaking, though, whether from the cold or the shock I could not tell. "I hired a private security firm to collect a discarded coffee cup from the lobby of your accounting firm 3 weeks ago." Caroline answered smoothly, entirely unapologetic about the invasion of my privacy. "I have been tracking you for a very long time, Blair. I know about your finance degree from Northwestern. I know you made senior partner at your firm 2 years faster than anyone else in your company's history. I know you prefer your coffee black, and I know you absolutely despise the color pink, because your adoptive mother forced you to wear it for every single family holiday photo. I have watched you grow into a brilliant, formidable woman entirely from the shadows." Her words hit me like a physical blow. She knew details about my life that only someone paying extremely close attention would know. But the revelation did not bring me comfort. It brought a sudden, overwhelming wave of furious resentment. "If you have been watching me this whole time, why did you never step in?" I asked, the anger finally bubbling up through my freezing skin. "Diane just threw me out into a freezing rainstorm without a coat, my phone, or my wallet. She has emotionally abused me for 3 decades. She used me as a prop to make herself look like a saint to her country club friends, while constantly reminding me that I was an unwanted burden. If you are really my biological mother, and you clearly have an immense amount of money and resources, why did you leave me in that toxic nightmare of a house?" Caroline's expression hardened instantly. The faint smile vanished, and her blue eyes turned as cold and sharp as cracked ice. "Because I was legally barred from making any contact with you until your 35th birthday," she stated, her voice tight with decades of suppressed rage. "A birthday that is exactly 4 months from today." If I had approached you, spoken to you, or interfered in your life even one day sooner, it would have triggered a catastrophic legal clause. It would have destroyed your future and left you with absolutely nothing. My forensic mind caught on to the specific legal terminology immediately. What clause? I asked, leaning forward despite myself. What are you talking about? Who has the power to put a gag order on a wealthy woman trying to contact her own daughter? Caroline did not answer my question directly. Instead, she reached over and flipped the heavy dossier to the second section. She tapped a perfectly manicured fingernail against a faded yellowed piece of paper, protected inside a clear plastic sleeve. It was an official employment record dated exactly 34 years ago. I scanned the document, my eyes locking onto the name, printed in crisp black typewriter ink under the job title of administrative assistant. The name on the employment file was Diane. I stared at the name, my brain struggling to process the connection between my abusive adoptive mother and the wealthy stranger claiming to be my biological family. I did not leave you with her, Caroline said, her voice dropping to a lethal, chilling whisper. She took you. I blinked, the sheer absurdity of the statement clashing with the ironclad proof sitting in my lap. How does an administrative assistant just take a child from a wealthy family? I demanded, my voice echoing loudly in the confined space of the SUV. That is impossible. There are courts, background checks, lawyers. You expect me to believe Diane just walked out of a hospital with a billionaire's baby and nobody noticed? Caroline did not flinch. She leaned back against the leather seat, her expression tight with decades of suppressed anger. It is not impossible when the billionaire in question is the one actively trying to hide the baby. I stopped. My grandfather. My father was a deeply conservative, aggressively controlling man with massive political aspirations in New York. Caroline explained, her words clipped and precise. When I got pregnant out of wedlock at 23, he viewed it as a catastrophic public relations liability. He isolated me at a private medical facility in upstate New York for the entire duration of my pregnancy. His plan was to arrange a quiet, totally closed adoption. Diane was his most trusted secretary. She was tasked with handling the confidential paperwork and coordinating with the private agency. I stared at the 34-year-old employment file. A sickening puzzle was starting to piece itself together in my highly analytical mind. She intercepted the process. Exactly, Caroline said, her voice turning venomous. Diane was drowning in debt. She saw an opportunity to secure her future. She forged my signature on the relinquishment forms and bypassed the agency entirely. By the time I recovered from a complicated emergency delivery and demanded to see you, Diane was already gone. She had legally registered herself as your adoptive mother in a completely different state. I shook my head, my forensic brain immediately finding the glaring flaw in this story. But your family had endless resources. You could have hired an army of ruthless corporate lawyers. You could have destroyed her and taken me back in a heartbeat. Caroline let out a bitter, humorless laugh. We could have. But Diane was not just a secretary. She kept my father's private ledgers. She had physical evidence of his illegal campaign contributions, his offshore tax evasion, and his massive corporate fraud. She blackmailed him. She told him that if he tried to invalidate the adoption or send the police after her, she would leak everything to the federal authorities and the press. She would ruin his empire and put him in federal prison. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Diane, the woman who constantly berated me for not being grateful enough for her charity, had literally stolen me to use as human collateral. So he paid her off, I said, the bitter taste of betrayal rising in my throat. He let her keep me to save his own skin. He did worse than that, Caroline replied, her piercing blue eyes locking onto mine. He established an irrevocable blind trust. It paid Diane a massive monthly stipend disguised as a private adoption subsidy to keep her quiet and maintain your living expenses. That is how she afforded that sprawling Tudor house. That is how she funded Savannah's entire life and paid for Andre's imported sports cars. Your existence was their personal automated teller machine. They built their entire country club facade using the hush money my father paid to keep you away from me. My stomach violently churned. Every memory of my childhood took on a sick, twisted new meaning. Diane had never loved me. I was just the hostage she needed to keep the massive checks cashing. The oversized hand-me-down clothes I was forced to wear, the constant public reminders that I was a burden, the fact that she blindly funded Savannah's lavish lifestyle while forcing me to take out crippling student loans for college. It was all a calculated, cruel performance. But my father was extremely paranoid. Carolyn continued pulling me out of my spiraling thoughts. He knew Diane was fundamentally greedy. He structured the trust with a highly specific termination clause. The monthly payments expire entirely on your 35th birthday. My heart skipped a beat. My 35th birthday, exactly 4 months from today. At that exact moment, the full principle of the trust unlocks and transfers legally to you, Caroline said. Over $50 million. But there is a catch. My father included a strict morality and competency clause. If you are deemed legally incompetent, or if you are convicted of a felony before you turn 35, the money defaults permanently to your legal guardian. To Diane. Yes, to Diane. Caroline nodded slowly. For the last year, I have watched her grow increasingly desperate as your birthday approaches. She knows the monthly gravy train is about to derail. She needs to prove you are unfit so she can file for a legal conservatorship and seize permanent control of the $50 million. That is why she constantly gaslights you. That is why she continuously provokes you in front of the extended family, trying to make you look emotionally unstable and volatile. And tonight I whispered the pieces finally snapping into perfect, horrifying alignment. Tonight she picked a massive fight over Andre's fraudulent tax returns. She aggressively threw me out into the freezing rain with no coat, no keys, and no phone. She knew I would be stranded. She knew I would be desperate and angry. Caroline reached into her sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a brand new encrypted titanium iPad. She unlocked the screen with a quick swipe and handed the heavy device over to me. She did not just throw you out to freeze, Blair. Caroline said, her voice dropping to a low, urgent pitch that commanded total attention. She threw you out so she could make a phone call without you being able to defend yourself. I want you to look at the active dispatch alerts for your local district. I took the iPad, my hands trembling slightly as I looked at the glowing digital screen. It was running a sophisticated police scanner application, filtering real-time emergency dispatch logs for my hometown. My eyes scanned the lines of green text scrolling across the black background, and my blood ran absolutely cold. The green text on the police dispatch application pulsed against the dark screen, delivering a reality so twisted my brain physically struggled to process it. Dispatch code 410, grand larceny, suspect fleeing the scene. I watched in real time as the dispatcher updated the active log. A female caller identifying herself as Diane had just reported a massive theft from her family corporate accounts. She gave them my full legal name, my physical description, my license plate number, and my exact home address. The report explicitly claimed that I had used my position as a forensic accountant to bypass their security protocols, embezzling exactly $200,000 before violently threatening the family and fleeing into the night. $200,000. The exact dollar amount that Savannah had siphoned into Andre's offshore accounts over the last 6 months. They were not just trying to get rid of me. They were using me as the ultimate scapegoat to cover up their own massive financial crimes. It was a devastatingly perfect, ruthless trap. Diane knew she could not just wait for me to turn 35. She needed a guaranteed legal mechanism to seize control of the trust fund before the clock ran out. By framing me for federal wire fraud, she was actively trying to trigger my biological grandfather's morality clause. If I was indicted and convicted of a felony, I would be deemed legally unfit by the state. The $50 million would default permanently to my adoptive mother, and I would spend the next decade rotting in a federal prison cell. I am officially a fugitive. I whispered the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I cannot go to my apartment. The police are probably already there waiting for me. I cannot swipe my credit cards because they will instantly track my location. I cannot even call my law firm for help because Diane has already painted me as a desperate fleeing criminal. In the span of 30 minutes, she had effectively erased my entire existence and replaced it with a manufactured criminal profile. The flash drive in my pocket suddenly felt like a brick of solid gold. Andre thought he was clever. He thought because he used encrypted offshore routing numbers, his tracks were completely covered. But he was dealing with someone who audited massive corporate conglomerates for a living. I had already mapped his entire embezzlement network before I even sat down for the turkey dinner. Diane and Andre assumed they had cornered a helpless victim. They did not realize the fatal mistake they had just made. Caroline reached out and gently took the iPad from my frozen hands. The black luxury SUV smoothly navigated down a hidden ramp, pulling into an intensely lit, highly secure underground parking garage. The driver put the vehicle in park, and the heavy doors automatically unlocked. "Welcome to my private residence," Caroline said, stepping out into the pristine garage. "No one knows this property belongs to me. It is held under a series of anonymous corporate shell companies. You are completely safe here. There are no cameras in the private elevator, and my security team sweeps the entire building daily for bugs." I followed her out of the vehicle, my legs still feeling weak and unsteady. We stepped into a private elevator that shot up 30 floors in absolute silence, opening directly into a massive, breathtakingly modern penthouse suite that overlooked the glittering city skyline. The severe winter storm raged outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside, it was totally silent and impenetrable. I stood in the center of the lavish living room, my soaked clothes dripping onto the expensive hardwood floor. My entire life had just been incinerated. My career, my home, my spotless reputation, everything I had meticulously built with my own two hands, was gone, stolen by the woman who had stolen me first. The sheer weight of the injustice threatened to crush my chest. I felt the familiar hot sting of tears pricking the corners of my eyes as the shock began to wear off, and the terrifying reality set in. Caroline walked over to a sleek, dark mahogany bar cart. She picked up a heavy crystal decanter and deliberately poured 2 generous glasses of expensive amber scotch. The clinking of the glass broke the heavy silence in the large room. She turned around, her posture impeccably straight, her pale blue eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that burned right through my rising panic. She did not offer me a warm hug. She did not offer me hollow words of comfort. She offered me the one thing I actually needed in that exact moment: a weapon. She held one of the crystal glasses out to me. "Are we going to cry about it, or are we going to ruin them?" I looked at the glass. I thought about the decades of deep emotional abuse. I thought about the fake smiles, the forced gratitude, the humiliating family dinners, where I was constantly treated like an unwanted stray dog. I thought about Savannah and Andre laughing in that warm dining room, while I froze on the front porch, entirely unaware that they had just tried to send me to prison. The tears instantly dried up, replaced by a cold, highly focused, calculated rage. I am a forensic accountant. I know exactly how to dismantle a financial empire piece by piece until there is nothing left but dust. Diane wanted to play a game of corporate warfare, completely unaware that she had just handed me the ultimate billionaire backing. I reached out and took the glass of scotch from Caroline's hand. I choose ruin. The next morning, I woke up in a guest suite larger than my entire city apartment. I did not go to the local precinct to defend myself against Diane's fabricated police report. I did not call my law firm to explain my sudden absence or try to salvage my career. I did not reach out to any of my friends to tell them I was safe. I went completely terrifyingly silent. I knew that the moment I engaged with Diane's narrative, I would be playing her game on her terms. By vanishing entirely, I stripped her of her primary weapon and left her swinging at empty air. Caroline understood exactly what I needed to execute my retaliation. By noon, she had brought in a private tech and security team via the dedicated penthouse elevator. Within 4 hours, they completely transformed the massive formal dining room into a highly secure state-of-the-art financial command center. They set up a semicircular array of 6 ultra-high-definition curved monitors running on a closed network of encrypted servers that were virtually untraceable. They provided me with specialized forensic auditing software that usually cost corporate firms tens of thousands of dollars to license. I sat at the center of the dark room, the cold blue glow of the massive screens illuminating my face. I pulled the heavy titanium flash drive from my pocket. It was the exact drive Andre had tried to physically rip from my hands the night before. I plugged it into the master terminal and began my work. Forensic accounting is not just about crunching numbers or balancing ledgers. It is the meticulous, ruthless art of hunting for the story that people are desperately trying to hide. I started with the surface-level corporate tax returns Savannah and Andre had originally given me to review. To the untrained eye, the documents looked like the standard paperwork of a struggling but legitimate business. But when I applied my specialized software to strip away the formatting and expose the raw data underneath, the true extent of their financial rot was laid bare. I began cross-referencing their corporate tax identification numbers with public property records, bank filings, and private credit databases that Caroline was able to legally access through her vast network of holding companies. What I found was pathetic. Their entire wealthy upper-crust suburban existence was nothing but a fragile house of cards built on staggering high-interest debt. Diane was practically drowning. The sprawling Tudor house she loved to show off, the one she constantly claimed was the physical manifestation of her hard work and superior parenting, was mortgaged to the absolute breaking point. Over the last 5 years, she had taken out 3 separate aggressive home equity lines of credit. She was using that borrowed money simply to cover Savannah's exorbitant daily lifestyle and to maintain her own platinum-tier membership at the local country club. Diane was literally paying for her weekly champagne luncheons and tennis lessons using credit cards that were days away from defaulting. This desperate, suffocating debt perfectly explained why she was willing to commit a felony by framing me. She urgently needed to trigger the morality clause in my grandfather's trust to seize the $50 million before the banks foreclosed on her entire life. I shifted my focus to my sister. Savannah's luxury organic skincare brand was a complete financial disaster. She was bleeding cash at an astonishing rate. She was paying $20,000 a month to lease a trendy downtown warehouse that was currently sitting full of expired, rotting cosmetic inventory that nobody wanted to buy. To keep up appearances on her social media accounts and pretend she was a thriving entrepreneur, Savannah had resorted to taking out predatory corporate payday loans. The interest rates on those loans were hovering near a catastrophic 40%. She was trapped in a death spiral of debt, borrowing from one ruthless lender just to make the minimum payments on another. For 3 straight days, I barely slept. I drank black coffee until my hands shook, staring at the screens as I meticulously mapped out every single fraudulent transaction, every hidden bank account, and every forged signature. I was building a digital guillotine, and they had willingly handed me all the materials. But the real shock, the discovery that completely shifted the battlefield, came when I finally broke through the encrypted firewall protecting Andre's private investment firm accounts. Andre was supposed to be a highly successful venture capitalist. He walked around family gatherings in custom Italian suits, talking down to everyone while aggressively flaunting his wealth. I already knew from my preliminary audit that Savannah had been secretly siphoning money from his private accounts to keep her skincare business afloat. I expected to find evidence of Andre scrambling to cover up his wife's theft. I expected to find a man panicked about losing his investors' money. What I found instead was much darker and far more dangerous. I isolated a series of highly obscured transactions buried deep within the third-quarter ledgers. Andre had deliberately mislabeled them as routine vendor payments for overseas consulting fees. Using my software to trace the alphanumeric routing numbers, I followed the money through a complex labyrinth of shell companies based out of the Cayman Islands. The digital trail finally ended at an offshore account that did not belong to any of his legitimate corporate investors. It belonged to him, and the balance was staggering. I sat frozen in my ergonomic chair, my eyes locked onto the glowing numbers on the central monitor. I had just found a massive illegal wire transfer of $3 million. It was not just tax evasion. It was not just Savannah stealing from him. Andre was actively embezzling millions of dollars from his own wealthy clients and hiding it offshore. And based on the timestamps of the wire transfers, he was preparing to liquidate his remaining domestic assets and completely flee the country, leaving Savannah and Diane to take the fall for the entire financial collapse. The realization made my blood run absolutely cold. I stared at the glowing offshore account balance, $3 million. Andre was not just a fraud, he was preparing to abandon his wife and my adoptive mother to face the fallout of his massive financial crimes. But a crucial piece of the puzzle was still missing. If Andre was successfully siphoning millions into the Cayman Islands, why did Savannah need to take out 40% interest payday loans just to keep the lights on at her warehouse? Why were they fighting so desperately to maintain a facade of wealth if Andre actually had real liquid capital hidden away? I pivoted my focus from the offshore banking ledgers to their personal communications. Using a back-end vulnerability in their shared corporate server, a minor security flaw I had actually warned them to fix, over 6 months ago, I bypassed their pathetic security protocols and accessed their synchronized email archives. I filtered the inbox by attachments and high-priority flags, zeroing in on a specific thread dated just 3 days before our explosive Thanksgiving dinner. The subject line of the initial email from Andre was written in all capital letters. It simply read, "Where is the operating capital?" I opened the thread. What I read was a frantic digital screaming match that perfectly documented their mutual destruction. Andre had logged into his domestic investor fund, the primary account he used to pay his legitimate business expenses and mask his illegal offshore transfers, only to find it completely drained. Savannah had secretly gained access to his administrative passwords. In a desperate bid to save her sinking luxury organic skincare brand, she had transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars from his investor pool directly to her corporate payday lenders. Savannah's reply was a masterclass in manipulation and denial. She did not apologize. She blamed the economy, she blamed her marketing team, and she blamed him for not supporting her entrepreneurial dreams enough. She promised she would pay every single dime back the moment her next product line launched, completely delusional to the fact that her brand was already dead in the water. I waited to read the email where Andre finally snapped. I fully expected him to threaten divorce, to call his lawyers, or to report her for wire fraud. After all, stealing from venture capital investors carries mandatory federal prison time. But Andre's response revealed the true pathetic depth of his cowardice. He was completely trapped. If he reported Savannah's theft, his investors would immediately demand a comprehensive forensic audit of his entire firm. And a corporate audit of that magnitude would instantly expose the $3 million he had secretly wired to his own offshore accounts. Savannah's absolute incompetence had accidentally created a hostage situation. If she went down, she was taking his massive offshore retirement plan down with her. He could not expose her to the authorities, but he also could not explain the missing domestic funds to his wealthy, demanding clients. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone with the technical expertise to plausibly execute a complex cyber theft, and someone isolated enough that no one would believe their defense. He needed me. I scrolled down to the final email in the chain sent by Andre at 2 a.m. the night before Thanksgiving. My chest tightened as I read the cold, calculated instructions he laid out for my sister. "Invite Blair to dinner," he wrote. "Tell her the IRS is looking into the skincare brand and play the victim. Beg her to look at the books. The second she logs into our server from her personal laptop, her IP address will be registered in the system logs. Once she leaves, I will initiate a hard wipe of the domestic ledgers and transfer the remaining blame to her access point. We tell Diane she caught Blair stealing. We file the police report first thing Friday morning. By the time Blair realizes what happened, her career is over, the investors will blame her for the missing cash, and we walk away completely clean. I sat back in the heavy leather chair, the glow of the monitors reflecting off my face. The sheer malice of their plan was breathtaking. They did not just throw me out into the freezing rain on a whim. The entire fight at the dinner table, Diane throwing the gravy boat, Savannah's manufactured outrage, Andre trying to physically rip the flash drive from my hands. It was all a carefully orchestrated theater production designed to frame me for their collective felonies. They were perfectly willing to completely destroy my life, strip away my professional CPA license, and send me to federal prison, just to buy themselves a few more months of country club dinners and leased sports cars. A sharp metallic click echoed in the quiet room. I turned my head to see Caroline standing in the doorway of the command center. She was holding a sleek silver tray with a fresh pot of black coffee and 2 porcelain mugs. She had changed into a tailored silk robe, looking every inch the ruthless corporate tycoon she was. She walked over, her sharp blue eyes scanning the massive wall of monitors. "I see you found the motive," she said smoothly, setting the tray down on the desk. "I found the entire execution plan." I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Andre is a coward, Savannah is a thief, and Diane is their willing attack dog. They planned this exactly. They filed the grand larceny report knowing I would run. They assume I am currently hiding in some cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, terrified, broke, and frantically trying to find a public defender who will take a losing case." Caroline poured the dark coffee, the steam rising in the cool, climate-controlled air of the penthouse. "And what are you actually doing, Blair?" I looked back at the screen, staring at the digital signatures of the people who had made my childhood a living hell. They felt entirely safe. They thought they held all the cards because they had struck the first blow. They thought I was a helpless, abandoned orphan, without a single ally in the world, running from a police warrant I could not afford to fight. They had no idea that their meticulously planned scapegoat was currently sitting in a virtually impenetrable fortress 30 floors above the city. They did not know I possessed every single piece of encrypted data proving their crimes. And most importantly, they did not know that I now had a ruthless, self-made billionaire mother standing right behind me, handing me the keys to an empire of liquid capital. I reached out and took the warm mug of coffee from Caroline. "I am going to buy their debt," I said, a slow, predatory smile finally touching my lips. "I am going to buy every single loan, every mortgage, and every line of credit they owe. And then I am going to squeeze them until they break." Caroline smiled, a genuine expression of absolute approval that transformed her sharp features. She did not hesitate or ask for a detailed business proposal. She simply walked over to the secure digital phone mounted on the command center wall, pressed a single speed dial button, and spoke quietly to her private wealth manager. Within 30 minutes, a secure corporate holding account was generated under a newly formed Delaware Limited Liability Company. It was completely anonymous, untraceable, and legally ironclad. The starting balance Caroline deposited into my control was $20 million in pure liquid cash. For the first time in my entire life, I was not operating from a position of defense. I had the ultimate financial leverage, and I knew exactly where to strike first. Buying debt is not a straightforward process for the average person, but in the world of high finance, bad debt is a highly liquid commodity. Banks and predatory lenders are always looking to offload toxic assets to minimize their own risk portfolios. Diane and Savannah were walking toxic assets. I started with Diane. Her sprawling Tudor house, the physical monument to her country club status, and the very place she had thrown me out of, was heavily leveraged through a mid-sized regional bank. I knew from my initial audit that she had missed 2 consecutive payments on her third home equity line of credit. The bank was already flagging her account for pre-foreclosure review. Acting as the lead acquisition director of my newly formed shell company, which I aggressively named Apex Restructuring, I contacted the commercial lending division of Diane's bank. I offered to purchase her entire mortgage portfolio, assuming all the risk in exchange for a clean cash buyout. Because my offer was backed by Caroline's verified billionaire capital, the bank did not ask questions. They were absolutely thrilled to dump Diane's failing financial profile. Within 48 hours, the massive digital contracts were routed to my server. I digitally signed the acquisition papers, and just like that, the bank transferred the deed. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the digital property title on my monitor. Diane had spent 30 years parading around that house, treating me like a contaminated stray dog she had graciously allowed to sleep in the basement. She derived her entire sense of superiority from owning that real estate. Now, without her having the slightest clue, I was her sole mortgage holder. I legally owned the roof over her head. If she missed a single payment by even 1 minute, I had the immediate unilateral authority to evict her and seize the property. Next, I targeted Savannah. Her financial situation was even more chaotic, a tangled web of desperate corporate payday loans carrying catastrophic 40% interest rates. These predatory lenders operate in the financial shadows, and they are always eager for a quick guaranteed payout. Through Apex restructuring, I systematically bought out every single one of Savannah's outstanding business loans. I purchased the lease contract for her downtown warehouse. I even bought the outstanding vendor invoices she owed to the chemical suppliers who manufactured her expired, rotting organic skincare products. It took me 4 days of relentless surgical precision to acquire the entire network of their liabilities. When I was finished, I held the absolute legal rights to every major financial pillar supporting their fake wealthy existence. I owned Diane's home. I owned Savannah's business. I held the power to freeze their credit, garnish their remaining bank accounts, and force them into involuntary bankruptcy. And my name was completely absent from every single piece of paperwork. I was pulling the strings from the shadows, an invisible predator stalking them through the very financial system they thought they had manipulated to destroy me. The psychological shift within me was profound. Less than a week ago, I was shivering on a freezing porch, terrified of a fabricated police warrant, believing my life was entirely over. Now I felt an icy, untouchable calm. Diane and Andre thought they were safe. They thought I was a broke, panicked fugitive hiding from the law. They were probably sleeping soundly in their expensive beds, confident that their brutal scheme had worked perfectly. They had no idea they were already locked inside a financial cage, and I was just waiting for the perfect moment to drop a match on it. With the traps firmly set, it was time to let them know the game had changed. I opened a blank legal template on my computer and began drafting the formal notices of debt acquisition. The language had to be flawlessly bureaucratic, cold, and utterly terrifying to anyone who understood financial law. I explicitly detailed that Apex Restructuring had assumed full control of their accounts due to a severe violation of their original lending terms. I cited their missed payments, their unstable revenue streams, and their highly irregular asset management. But a simple letter was not enough. I needed to induce a level of panic that would make them reckless. I needed to force them into a corner where they would have to confront their lies in front of the very people they were trying to impress. I looked at the social media tracker I had running on one of my side monitors. Savannah had been posting daily aggressive updates about her upcoming 5-year vow renewal gala with Andre. It was scheduled to take place in exactly 3.5 months at the most exclusive, expensive luxury hotel in the city. She had invited 200 wealthy guests. She had ordered a massive $5,000 custom cake. It was meant to be her crowning social achievement, a lavish display of their fake success. It was the perfect stage for a slaughter. I scrolled down to the mandatory compliance section of the formal debt notice. I typed out a strict directive stating that due to the high-risk nature of their acquired debt, Apex Restructuring was initiating a mandatory comprehensive financial audit of all their assets to determine if immediate foreclosure and liquidation were necessary. I set the date and time for the final audit review. I scheduled it for the exact evening of Savannah and Andre's vow renewal gala. I printed the heavy legal documents on crisp, expensive corporate letterhead. I placed them into thick black envelopes and sealed them. I handed the envelopes to Caroline's private courier, instructing him to deliver them directly to Diane's front door via certified mail requiring her direct signature. The first strike was officially launched. The bleeding was about to begin. Less than 2 hours after Caroline's private courier delivered the certified black envelopes to the sprawling Tudor house, my digital tracking software pinged. The delivery receipt had been signed. I sat back in the heavy leather chair in the command center, my eyes glued to the monitors, waiting to see what their first move would be. I fully expected Diane to call the commercial lending department of her bank in a hysterical rage. I expected Andre to immediately scramble his lawyers. But they did not do any of those logical, business-oriented things. Faced with a terrifying, anonymous corporate audit that threatened to expose their entire fraudulent existence, Diane defaulted to the only weapon she actually knew how to wield. She went straight to the internet to control the narrative. A notification popped up on the social media tracker I had running on the far-right monitor. Diane had just gone live on Facebook and Instagram simultaneously. I clicked the alert, expanding the video feed to fill the large central screen. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation and visual framing. Diane was sitting on the expensive velvet sofa in her formal living room, but she had deliberately altered her appearance to look like a devastated, shattered victim. Her normally flawless salon-styled hair was slightly disheveled. Instead of her usual designer silk blouses and expensive jewelry, she was wearing a plain, oversized beige cardigan. She looked straight into the camera, her eyes red and swimming with manufactured tears. "My heart is completely broken today," Diane began, her voice trembling with perfect theatrical fragility. "I am making this video because our family is facing a nightmare, and I need our community to hear the truth directly from me before the rumors spread any further." I watched, my expression entirely blank, as Diane spun a massive, elaborate lie to her thousands of local followers. She claimed that the sudden, terrifying audit from Apex Restructuring was not a result of her missed mortgage payments or Savannah's failing business loans. Instead, she boldly claimed that the corporate audit was triggered because I had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from their family accounts, triggering an automatic federal review of their entire estate. "We gave Blair everything," Diane sobbed, covering her face with her hands, just long enough to let the fake tears spill over her cheeks. "We took her in when she had absolutely nothing. We loved her as our own. But she used her specialized accounting skills to bypass our security. She stole our life savings, she destroyed our Thanksgiving dinner with violent threats, and now she is on the run from the police. We are facing financial ruin because of the daughter I tried so hard to save." The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. She was using my complete silence and my absence to unilaterally convict me in the court of public opinion, and her performance worked flawlessly. Within minutes, the video began to spread like wildfire. Savannah immediately shared the broadcast to her own business pages, adding a tearful, highly filtered video of her own. Savannah claimed that her luxury skincare brand was now facing bankruptcy, specifically because her jealous, bitter older sister had maliciously drained her operating accounts. Andre, ever the calculating coward, took to professional networking sites. He posted a solemn, highly polished statement on his professional page, warning other venture capitalists about the dangers of trusting extended family members with sensitive corporate access, subtly painting himself as the honorable businessman betrayed by a rogue accountant. I watched the view count on Diane's original video climb from hundreds to thousands. The comments section devolved into a massive, hateful echo chamber. The wealthy wives from Diane's country club, the women from her charity boards, and the local suburban neighbors all flooded the post with words of support for her and absolute venom for me. They called me a sociopath. They called me a criminal mastermind. They validated every single awful thing Diane had ever said about me. But the real damage, the strike that actually made my chest tighten with genuine anger, came an hour later. I had linked my secure command center terminal to my professional cloud accounts to monitor my corporate communications. The notification bell chimed loudly in the quiet penthouse. Forwarded emails and direct messages began pouring into my inbox from my actual accounting firm in Chicago. My managing partner, a man I had worked tirelessly for over the last 7 years, sent a cold, legally mandated email informing me that I was immediately suspended without pay pending the outcome of the active police investigation. Former colleagues, people I had mentored and shared lunches with, sent me text messages demanding to know if the viral videos were true. Some expressed shock, others expressed disgust, but not a single one of them offered me the benefit of the doubt. 15 years. I had spent 15 years of my life meticulously building a flawless, unassailable reputation in the corporate financial sector. I had sacrificed my personal life, worked grueling 80-hour weeks, and maintained an absolute standard of ethical perfection just to prove to the world that I was not the defective broken orphan Diane always claimed I was. And in less than an hour, Diane had incinerated all of it with a ring light and a few fake tears. Caroline walked into the command center, her eyes scanning the vicious comments scrolling rapidly across the screens. She placed a hand on the back of my leather chair. "My legal team can have these videos pulled down in 10 minutes, Caroline said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "We can file an emergency defamation injunction. We can sue them into oblivion for every single word they just broadcasted. Just give me the word Blair." I stared at Diane's frozen, crying face on the monitor. The instinct to defend myself, to scream the truth from the rooftops and clear my name, was almost overwhelming. But I forced my analytical mind to override my bleeding ego. Defamation suits took months. They required public hearings, depositions, and dragging my own name further through the mud just to prove a negative. That was exactly what Diane wanted. She wanted me to emerge from hiding. She wanted me to panic and hire a defense attorney so she could pinpoint my exact location and serve me with civil papers. "No," I said quietly, never taking my eyes off the screen. "Let them talk. Let them share it to every single person they know. The bigger they build this lie, the more public their collapse will be when we pull the floor out from under them. Do not touch the videos." Caroline squeezed my shoulder in silent agreement, recognizing the exact same ruthless patience in me that had built her own billionaire empire. I turned my attention away from the social media feeds and back to the complex financial models I was building to dismantle Andre's offshore accounts. If they wanted to play the victims on the internet, I would let them. I was too busy buying the very ground they walked on. Suddenly, the encrypted burner phone resting on the edge of the desk vibrated violently against the dark wood. I paused. Caroline's tech team had set up that specific device with a ghost number, meticulously routing it through a dozen international servers. It was designed to intercept calls to my old cell phone number without revealing my actual location. Only someone dialing my original disconnected line would be routed through to this device. I picked up the heavy phone and looked at the glowing screen. It was an unknown number displaying a local area code. I pressed the green accept button and lifted the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent. I needed the caller to speak first to establish an audio baseline. "Blair," a quiet, breathless voice whispered through the speaker. "Are you there? Please tell me you are there." I recognized the voice immediately. It was my cousin Brittany. She was my mother's niece, a woman who had always played the role of the sweet, neutral peacemaker at our volatile family gatherings. She was the one who always brought the extra dessert, the one who sent generic birthday cards, and the one who always looked away when Diane belittled me in public. "It is Brittany," the voice continued, sounding frantic and perfectly laced with concern. "I saw the videos Aunt Diane posted. I heard about the police report. Blair, I know you did not do this. I know how insane she is. Please, you have to talk to me. I want to help you hide." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, letting my analytical mind process the variables. Brittany was sweet, yes, but she was also incredibly weak-willed and entirely dependent on Diane for her social standing in the family. She would never boldly defy my mother to help me. More importantly, she had dialed my old cell phone number. The fact that she was calling me right now, just hours after Diane posted that viral video, meant she was not calling out of the goodness of her heart. She was on a fishing expedition and Diane was absolutely holding the rod. I forced a harsh, ragged breath into the receiver. I let my voice crack, pitching it half an octave higher to mimic raw, unadulterated panic. Brittany. I choked out, forcing a fake sob. Oh my God. Brittany, it is so bad. I do not know what to do. I am so scared. Oh, Blair, honey, I am so sorry. Brittany cooed. Her voice dripped with manufactured sympathy. You know I love you. You know I do not believe all those terrible things Aunt Diane is saying on the internet. You just need to tell me where you are. I can come get you. We can figure this out together. I pressed the heavy phone tighter against my ear and closed my eyes, focusing entirely on the ambient sound coming through the line. Beneath Brittany's steady breathing, I heard the faint, unmistakable clinking of ice against crystal. Someone was drinking. Then a sharp, muffled whisper barely registered over the digital connection. Ask her what city she is in. Find out if she has contacted a lawyer. It was Diane. The pitch and cadence were unmistakable. Brittany had me on speakerphone in Diane's living room. I opened my eyes and met Caroline's gaze across the command center. I gave her a single slow nod. Caroline crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe, a wicked smile spreading across her face as she watched me work. I cannot tell you where I am, Brittany, I cried, letting the panic escalate into a hysterical ramble. The police are looking for me. I saw the news alerts. Diane told them I stole $200,000. I did not do it, Brittany. I swear to you, I did not do it. But they are going to arrest me. I am sitting in this disgusting, cheap motel room and I am absolutely terrified. Just take a deep breath, Brittany said smoothly, entirely ignoring my claim of innocence. You need legal help, Blair. Have you called your firm? Do you have an attorney? I let out a loud, pathetic sob. I cannot afford an attorney. My firm suspended me this morning. The bank froze my checking account. I am completely broke. I had to leave my apartment with nothing but the cash in my purse. If I go back to Chicago, they will put me in handcuffs. I have absolutely no one to fight this for me. There was a brief pause on the line. I heard another faint rustle of clothing, followed by Diane's muffled voice, frantic and commanding. Get her location, right now. Blair, you cannot just run forever. Brittany pressed her tone, taking on a sudden urgency. You need money to survive. Tell me where you are hiding. Let me wire you some cash so you can at least eat. I promise I will not tell Aunt Diane. Just give me the name of the motel. I took a deep, shaky breath, preparing to deliver the geographical lie that would cement my total disappearance in their minds. You cannot wire me money, Brittany, I whispered, sounding utterly defeated. I am not even in the country anymore. What do you mean? Brittany gasped, genuine shock finally breaking through her rehearsed script. I crossed the border 3 hours ago. I lied seamlessly. I paid a long-haul truck driver everything I had left in my wallet to let me hide in the back of his rig. I am standing at a public payphone in Tijuana right now. I do not speak the language, I have no money, and I am not coming back. Tell Diane she wins. Tell her she can keep the house, the trust, everything. I just do not want to go to federal prison. I hung up the phone before she could say another word. The line went dead with a sharp click. I placed the encrypted burner phone back on the desk and let out a long, slow exhale. The fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by an icy, absolute calm. Caroline walked over and poured herself a fresh cup of coffee, looking thoroughly entertained. Tijuana, she asked, raising an elegant eyebrow. It is the perfect decoy, I explained, turning my chair back to face the wall of monitors. Diane knows I am analytical and risk-averse. Fleeing to Mexico with no money and no legal representation sounds exactly like the desperate, chaotic move of a terrified accountant whose entire life just collapsed. By tomorrow morning, she will be telling all her country club friends that I have vanished into the cartel underworld and am never coming back. And what does that accomplish? Caroline asked, though the dangerous gleam in her eye told me she already knew the answer. It makes them reckless, I said, pointing to the digital ledgers tracking Andre and Savannah's accounts. Right now, the only thing keeping them somewhat cautious is the fear that I might hire a defense attorney and demand a forensic audit to clear my name. But I just handed them a recorded confession of my absolute defeat. I just told them I am broke, unrepresented, and hiding in a foreign country where local authorities have zero jurisdiction over their financial crimes. They will feel entirely invincible. Exactly, I nodded. And when arrogant, greedy people feel invincible, they always overplay their hand. I turned my attention back to the massive screens. The trap I had set with Apex restructuring was quietly ticking away in the background. Diane had the formal audit notice sitting on her kitchen counter, but now she believed the only person capable of exposing her was rotting in a Mexican border town. She would assume the audit was just a routine corporate review easily manipulated with a few forged documents and a fake smile. She would not take it seriously until it was far too late. I spent the next 48 hours monitoring their digital footprint with ruthless precision. I watched their bank accounts, their email servers, and their credit inquiries. I was waiting for the inevitable moment when their newfound sense of absolute security would cause them to make a fatal error. I did not have to wait long. On the third morning, a massive red alert flashed across my central monitor. The alarm was triggered by a high-level credit inquiry routed directly through the domestic title registry. I clicked the alert, expanding the digital paperwork onto the main screen. My eyes scanned the secure banking portal, and my heart gave a hard, triumphant thump against my ribs. Emboldened by my supposed disappearance, Diane and Andre had just made a fatal, arrogant mistake. They were attempting to pull off the ultimate financial heist, completely unaware that I was the one holding the vault door wide open. The red alert pulsing on my central monitor was a direct ping from the automated underwriting system of a prominent luxury lending firm based in Manhattan. I leaned forward, my hands flying across the mechanical keyboard as I intercepted the encrypted data packet and unpacked the financial filing. As the digital paperwork populated across my screens, the sheer audacity of what I was looking at actually made me let out a sharp, genuine laugh. Diane and Andre were attempting to secure a massive $500,000 personal line of credit. I pulled up the itemized expense sheet they had submitted alongside the loan application. It was entirely designated for Savannah and Andre's 5-year vow renewal gala. They were trying to borrow $500,000 to pay for imported white orchids, a custom-built champagne fountain, a 10-piece string quartet, and a $5,000 tiered cake. Savannah had completely maxed out her predatory business loans, and Andre was absolutely terrified to move any of his stolen offshore millions back into the country for fear of triggering an SEC audit. So they needed fast liquid cash to maintain their wealthy facade in front of 200 elite country club guests. But because Diane's credit score was currently in a free fall from her missed mortgage payments, she could not secure a standard bank loan. She needed a high net worth guarantor. Andre was acting as the primary co-signer, leveraging his fake reputation as a highly successful venture capitalist. However, the luxury lending firm still required a hard physical asset to secure the $500,000 line of credit. Diane had pledged the Tudor house as collateral. They were attempting to take out a massive loan against a property they no longer legally owned. I watched the cryptographic stamps of their digital signatures lock into the PDF application in real time. They were completely blinded by their own arrogance and their absolute belief that I was currently starving in a Mexican border town. They assumed they could just push this paperwork through using Andre's smooth-talking relationship with a corrupt private banker, completely bypassing a manual title review. I zoomed in on the sworn legal affidavits attached to the back of the loan application. By submitting this document, Diane was legally declaring that the Tudor property was completely free and clear of any third-party liens. She checked the box stating there were no pending corporate audits against her estate. Andre checked the box stating his income was entirely derived from legitimate domestic sources. Savannah even signed as a secondary beneficiary, swearing her defunct skincare business was actively generating revenue to assist with the loan repayment. Every single box they checked was a separate count of federal perjury. Every digital signature they submitted over a state line was a distinct count of federal wire fraud. They were meticulously documenting their own criminal conspiracy, entirely unaware that the system they were trying to manipulate was now fully controlled by me. Because the luxury lending firm utilized an automated digital clearinghouse to verify property deeds, the system immediately scanned the municipal property registry to confirm Diane's ownership. But the municipal registry no longer listed Diane or her original bank as the primary lien holder. It listed Apex Restructuring. The underwriting software performed its standard automated protocol. It generated a mandatory verification request and routed it directly to the registered server of the legal lien holder. The request pinged directly into my penthouse command center. I stared at the glowing authorization button on my screen. I possessed the unilateral power to reject the application right then and there. If I clicked the red denial icon, the luxury lending firm would instantly flag the application for severe mortgage fraud. Diane and Andre would be denied the funds, the vendors for the vow renewal would cancel their contracts, and the police would likely be knocking on the door of the Tudor house by tomorrow morning. It would be a swift, brutal end to their scheme. But it was not the end I wanted. Arresting them quietly in the middle of the week would allow Diane to spin the narrative. She would call her high society friends from the county jail, claiming there was a massive banking error. She would hire expensive defense attorneys and drag the legal proceedings out for years, draining the trust fund and exhausting my energy. I did not want them to go down quietly. I wanted them to fall from the absolute highest pedestal they could possibly build. I wanted them to stand in a room full of 200 of their wealthiest, most judgmental peers and watch their entire fake empire disintegrate into ash. To do that, the vow renewal gala had to happen. And for the gala to happen, they needed this $500,000. Caroline stepped up behind my chair, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. She looked at the flashing authorization prompt on the monitor. They are actively committing bank fraud. She noted, her voice smooth and entirely devoid of surprise. If you approve this, you are technically allowing a fraudulent transaction to process on your acquired asset. I am a certified forensic auditor, I replied. My eyes locked on the screen. The law explicitly allows me to observe and document financial crimes in progress if intercepting them would compromise a larger federal investigation. By approving this loan, I am not participating in the fraud. I am securing the evidence. Caroline smiled, taking a slow sip of her water. You are going to let them hang themselves with solid gold rope. Exactly, I said. I moved my mouse over the green authorization icon. I bypassed the security flag that indicated a discrepancy in the property title. I digitally stamped the verification form using the anonymous corporate seal of Apex Restructuring, confirming to the luxury lending firm that the collateral was approved for the loan. I clicked Submit. The screen flashed bright green. The underwriting software accepted the verified documentation and instantly triggered the automated wire transfer. I watched the digital ledger update in real time as $500,000 of liquid cash was deposited directly into Andre and Savannah's joint checking account. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair and let out a long, deeply satisfied breath. Diane, Savannah, and Andre were probably celebrating right now. They probably thought they were the smartest people in the world. They had successfully framed me for grand larceny, chased me out of the country, and secured the funding for the most lavish party of the decade. They felt untouchable. But the reality was entirely different. By approving that loan, I had just fundamentally shifted the mechanics of my trap. The cage door was officially locked, and the timer was ticking down. They had exactly 3 months until the vow renewal gala, 3 months until the Apex Restructuring audit came due, and 3 months until my 35th birthday unlocked the billionaire trust fund they were trying to steal. I was not going to let them enjoy those 3 months. I reached over and pulled up the secondary monitors, activating the offensive financial protocols I had spent the last week meticulously designing. The major strike would happen at the gala, but I needed to start softening their defenses immediately. I needed to induce a slow, agonizing paranoia that would fracture their alliances and turn them against each other before the final blow was even struck. "The trap is officially armed," I said quietly to the glowing screens. I highlighted Andre's platinum credit card accounts, the ones he used to pay for his daily luxuries, his expensive steakhouse dinners, and his imported car leases. I initiated a direct freeze through the Apex debt portal, citing irregular activity. Next, I flagged Savannah's vehicle registration, linking her unpaid corporate payday loans to the title of her luxury SUV to authorize an immediate repossession order. Now the bleeding begins. I let them marinate in their false sense of security for exactly 90 days. 3 months of absolute silence from me. 3 months of them spending the fraudulent $500,000 loan on crystal centerpieces, custom silk tablecloths, and imported champagne for the upcoming vow renewal gala. From my secure command center in the penthouse, I watched their daily digital habits, meticulously mapping out the precise moments when public humiliation would inflict the maximum amount of psychological damage. The trap was set, the doors were locked, and it was time to start dismantling their lives, one brick at a time. I decided to strike Andre first. It was a Tuesday evening, and the digital location tracker I had discreetly linked to his mobile device showed he was currently dining at a highly exclusive, notoriously expensive steakhouse in downtown Chicago. He was hosting a critical dinner for 3 potential venture capital clients. I knew from intercepting his emails that he was desperately trying to woo them into depositing fresh funds into his domestic accounts to replace the money Savannah had stolen. He needed their capital to maintain the illusion of his successful firm. According to the restaurant point-of-sale system that pinged against his banking app, Andre was pulling out all the stops. He ordered imported Wagyu beef rare white truffles and 3 bottles of vintage wine that cost $2,000 each. I sat back in my leather chair, watching the preliminary authorization requests hit the Apex restructuring portal. The total bill for the table was approaching $9,000. Andre was entirely predictable. He always paid for these lavish dinners with his heavy black platinum credit card to casually show off his limitless spending power to his guests. As the waiter ran the card, the final transaction request flashed across my central monitor in bright white text. I did not just hit the decline button. I initiated a hard, irrevocable security freeze on all of his linked domestic accounts, citing a critical violation of lending terms and suspected financial fraud. The restaurant system immediately spit back a harsh red error code. I could picture the scene playing out perfectly in the dimly lit, elegant dining room. The waiter politely returning to the table, leaning down to whisper discreetly in Andre's ear that the platinum card had been declined. Andre would smoothly laugh it off as a simple banking error or a fraud protection glitch. He would pull out his secondary gold card, making a charming joke to his wealthy clients about the inconveniences of modern banking. The waiter would run it again. Another hard decline. A third card. Declined. The silent, suffocating embarrassment would quickly settle over the table as his prospective investors watched his polished facade crumble. A man asking them for millions of dollars in investment capital could not even cover the cost of a steak dinner. I watched his digital footprint scramble as Andre rapidly tried to log into his banking applications from his phone under the table. Every single app showed a 0 available balance and a red padlock icon. He had to excuse himself from the table, red-faced and sweating, leaving his guests sitting in awkward silence while he made a frantic phone call to his private banker. But his banker could not help him because the debt was now completely owned, controlled, and frozen by my shell company. Andre had to walk back to that table and beg his potential clients to pay the $9,000 bill. I let Andre sweat in silent panic for exactly 1 week before I turned my crosshairs onto my sister. It was a bright Wednesday afternoon. Savannah was attending a highly publicized charity luncheon at the most exclusive country club in our hometown. It was an event Diane had practically begged the board to let Savannah co-chair. Savannah had driven her imported luxury SUV, the one she leased using her fraudulent corporate credentials, and parked it right in the front circle drive of the clubhouse for maximum visibility. She was currently inside the elegant ballroom, sipping expensive mimosas with the local suburban elite, loudly boasting about her thriving organic skincare brand and showing off photos of her upcoming vow renewal gala. What Savannah did not know was that the lease for that specific vehicle had been fully acquired by Apex Restructuring because she had defaulted on the underlying corporate payday loans. I also owned, the vehicle was legally classified as recoverable asset collateral. I logged into the private vendor portal on my secondary monitor and formally authorized the repossession order. For an extra $500 expedited service fee, I specifically instructed the repo agency to execute the retrieval in broad daylight exactly at noon. Through the digital tracking system, I watched the GPS dot of a heavy-duty commercial tow truck pull directly into the country club parking lot. I did not even need to be there to see the chaos unfold, because within 20 minutes, local social media pages began lighting up with videos recorded by the gossiping country club valets and wealthy guests. Savannah had rushed out of the dining room in her expensive designer dress, screaming at the top of her lungs. The video footage showed her chasing the large tow truck down the manicured brick driveway of the club. She hurled her heavy designer clutch at the windshield of the truck and threw a hysterical, violent tantrum right in front of the most judgmental women in the county. She shrieked that her husband was a millionaire, that she would sue the towing company into absolute bankruptcy, and that this was all a massive, ridiculous mistake. But the tow truck driver had legally binding paperwork, and he did not stop. He drove away with her ultimate status symbol securely hooked to the back of his rig. He left my sister standing in the middle of the driveway, hyperventilating, her mascara running down her face, completely humiliated, as 50 wealthy socialites recorded her public meltdown on their smartphones. The illusion of her perfect, wealthy life was instantly shattered in front of the exact people she cared about impressing the most. The dominoes were finally falling and the panic was setting in. My audio surveillance tapped into Diane's phone lines caught the immediate aftermath. Savannah called Diane, sobbing hysterically, screaming about the stolen car, the ruined charity luncheon, and the fact that Andre's credit cards were mysteriously declining all over town. Diane, entirely blinded by her own arrogance and decades of unchallenged privilege, did not suspect for a single second that she was under a targeted attack. She firmly believed she had already won the war by chasing me out of the country. Instead, she assumed this was a catastrophic, incompetent administrative error made by their local bank branch. She believed that some low-level bank teller had crossed a wire and accidentally frozen their assets. She was absolutely determined to make them pay dearly for embarrassing her golden child. I listened to the sharp, angry clicking of Diane's heels on the hardwood floor of the Tudor house. She grabbed her keys and stormed out the front door, slamming it behind her. She was marching directly down to the local bank branch, fully intending to scream at the branch manager and demand his head on a platter. She was about to demand answers from a man who no longer had any control over her financial existence, stepping blindly into the next layer of the trap. I adjusted the volume dial on my secure headset, leaning closer to the central monitor in the penthouse command center. Because my shell company, Apex Restructuring, had officially acquired all of Diane and Andre's financial liabilities and flagged them for severe documented fraud, my corporate legal team had the federal authority to request active administrative monitoring. I was tapped directly into the security and administrative audio feeds of Diane's local bank branch. Through the high-fidelity headphones, I heard the heavy glass doors of the bank swing open. The sharp, aggressive clicking of Diane's designer heels echoed loudly across the marble floor of the lobby. She did not bother waiting in the teller line. She marched directly past the velvet ropes, entirely ignoring the protests of the security guard, and slammed her heavy leather handbag down onto the front reception desk. "Get me Richard Wallace right this instant!" Diane demanded. Her voice was shrill, carrying that specific tone of absolute unearned authority she used to terrorize retail workers and waitstaff. I heard the young receptionist stammer, trying to explain that the branch manager was currently in a meeting, but Diane immediately cut her off. I do not care if he's on the phone with the president. Diane snapped. You go into his office and you tell him that one of his platinum-tier clients is standing in the lobby. You tell him that some incompetent idiot in your fraud department just declined my son-in-law's credit cards and allowed a rogue towing company to steal my daughter's vehicle. I am not leaving this desk until my accounts are unlocked and someone issues me a formal written apology. There was a tense silence on the audio feed, followed by the sound of a heavy wooden door opening. Richard Wallace, a man who had spent the last decade kissing Diane's ring and offering her complimentary champagne whenever she walked into his branch, stepped out of his office. But Richard did not sound like a subservient, eager banker today. He sounded incredibly tense, his voice completely stripped of its usual manufactured warmth. Please step into my office, Diane, Richard said smoothly, though the underlying coldness was unmistakable. We need to have a very serious conversation, and you do not want to have it out here in the main lobby. I listened to the sound of her heels following him into the private office. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing them inside. I do not want to sit down, Richard, Diane hissed immediately. I want my family's credit lines reinstated right now. Andre was humiliated in front of critical venture capital investors last night. Savannah is currently having a nervous breakdown in my living room. I want the names of the employees who authorized this freeze because I am going to make absolutely sure they never work in the financial sector again. Diane, Richard interrupted, his voice raising just enough to slice through her hysterical rant. I did not freeze your accounts. I no longer have the authority to access them. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. I could perfectly picture the look of total confusion washing over Diane's face. What are you talking about? She finally asked, her tone dropping its aggressive edge. You have managed my family estate for 15 years. I have millions of dollars routing through this institution. Not anymore, Richard stated flatly. 3 days ago, this bank received a legally binding, federally expedited transfer order. Your entire financial portfolio, including your primary checking accounts, your savings, Andre's commercial ledgers, and the deed to your house were acquired by an external corporate entity called Apex Restructuring. I already got a letter from them. Diane scoffed, though I could hear the first faint tremor of actual fear in her voice. It is just a routine debt consolidation firm. They are doing an audit. That does not give them the right to lock my checking accounts. I just took out a $500,000 line of credit through a private Manhattan lender. That cash was deposited directly into my joint account yesterday morning. I demand you give me access to it. I heard the rustle of heavy paper as Richard slid a file across his mahogany desk. That is exactly why your accounts are locked. Diane? Richard explained, his tone shifting from professional to openly accusatory. That $500,000 loan triggered a catastrophic security protocol. You pledged your Tudor house as collateral for that money. But you do not own that house anymore. Apex Restructuring owns it. When the digital wire transfer hit your account, Apex flagged the entire transaction as a severe act of federal mortgage fraud. No! Diane gasped, the reality of the situation finally beginning to penetrate her thick armor of arrogance. No, that is a mistake. I did not commit fraud. The loan was approved. It was a trap, Richard corrected her coldly. And you walked right into it. Apex Restructuring did not just freeze your active balances. They initiated a full federal compliance lockdown. Every single dollar associated with your Social Security number, Savannah's business tax identification, and Andre's investment firm has been entirely seized, pending a federal criminal investigation. You cannot do this! Diane screamed, her voice cracking violently. You cannot just take all my money. I am not taking it, Diane. The federal government is. And quite frankly, after reviewing the forged asset declarations you submitted to secure that loan, my bank is formally severing all ties with you to protect our own liability. You need to leave this building immediately. I listened as Diane's breathing turned ragged and shallow. The sheer magnitude of her collapse was hitting her all at once. She was not just embarrassed. She was completely, entirely broke. "Richard, please!" Diane begged, her voice instantly dropping the aggressive entitlement and shifting into raw, pathetic desperation. "The vow renewal is this Saturday. It is 3 days away. I have 200 guests flying in from across the country. I have to pay the caterers. I have to pay the florists. The hotel is demanding the final $70,000 deposit by tomorrow morning, or they are going to cancel the entire event and lock the ballroom doors. Just let me withdraw the deposit money. Just give me $70,000 and I will leave." I looked at the glowing numbers on my monitor. The available balance in her checking account was perfectly displayed. $0 and 0 cents. "I cannot give you money that does not exist," Richard replied. "Your accounts show a zero available balance. You have absolutely nothing left. If you write a check to that hotel, it will bounce, and you will be facing additional charges for writing fraudulent checks. I strongly suggest you cancel your party, hire a criminal defense attorney, and prepare yourself for the Apex audit. Now please leave my office before I'm forced to call security to escort you out." The audio feed captured the sound of Diane stumbling backward, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. She did not say another word. She burst out of the office, her footsteps heavy and erratic as she ran across the lobby toward the exit. I took off the headset and set it down on the command center desk. A deep, profoundly satisfying silence filled the penthouse. Diane was finally experiencing the exact same terror she had inflicted on me when she threw me out into the freezing rain. She was backed into a corner, completely isolated with absolutely no resources to save herself. She had 3 days to come up with tens of thousands of dollars to pay for a massive luxury gala, or she would have to face 200 of her elite judgmental country club friends and admit she was completely bankrupt. I knew Diane. I knew her pathological obsession with her social status. She would rather die than cancel that party and admit defeat. She would find a way to manipulate the hotel lie to the vendors and force the event to happen, clinging desperately to the hope that she could maintain the facade just a little bit longer. And that was exactly what I was counting on. I knew Diane would never simply surrender. For a woman whose entire identity was built on the perception of wealth, canceling a 200-guest gala was a fate worse than prison. Over the next 48 hours, my command center monitors painted a pathetic picture of pure, unadulterated desperation. I watched through digital ledgers and intercepted phone calls as the entire family scrambled to keep their crumbling facade intact. Andre, completely locked out of his stolen offshore millions, and his domestic venture capital firm, was forced to quietly sell his collection of vintage luxury watches to a private buyer just to generate enough liquid cash to pay the florists and the catering staff. Savannah, still hyperventilating over her repossessed vehicle, spent hours on the phone screaming at her bridesmaids, blaming a massive banking error for her sudden inability to pay for their professional hair and makeup. And Diane, stripped of her platinum credit cards and her home equity, actually drove to a high-end pawn shop 3 towns over. She sold her wedding ring and a diamond tennis bracelet just to secure a cashier's check for the final $70,000 hotel deposit. They were literally liquidating the last remnants of their real assets just to fund a fake party for 3 hours. It was pathetic, but it guaranteed that the stage would be set perfectly. The vow renewal was going to happen. By Friday afternoon, the day before the gala, the tension in the Tudor house was suffocating. I tapped into the audio feed from the smart home assistant located in Diane's kitchen. I could hear Savannah crying hysterically about the stress of the banking glitch, while Andre paced the floor, barking angrily into his cell phone. They were exhausted, terrified, and hanging on by a single thread. It was the perfect time to drop the anchor. I signaled Caroline's private courier, a tall, imposing man dressed in a sharp black suit. I had prepared the final piece of correspondence from Apex Restructuring. I did not send it through certified mail this time. I wanted a personal, highly intimidating delivery. Through the hacked feed of Diane's front porch security camera, I watched the courier walk up the brick pathway. He did not ring the doorbell. He knocked 3 times, heavy and authoritative. A moment later, the heavy oak door swung open. Diane stood there looking completely haggard. She was wearing yesterday's clothes. Her hair was unkempt, and the heavy bags under her eyes betrayed her absolute lack of sleep. She looked at the courier, her eyes darting nervously down to the thick black envelope in his hand. Delivery for Diane. The courier said, his voice flat and professional. He held out an electronic tablet for her signature. Diane snatched the stylus, her hand visibly trembling as she scribbled her name across the screen. She grabbed the black envelope and immediately slammed the door shut. I leaned forward in my leather chair, adjusting my headset to catch every single word spoken inside the kitchen. I heard the sharp sound of thick paper tearing as Diane ripped the envelope open. "What is it?" Andre demanded, his voice tight with anxiety. "Is it the bank again?" "No," Diane breathed, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "It is from Apex Restructuring, the company that bought our debt. They sent a formal letter from their executive board." "Read it." Savannah snapped, her voice nasal from crying. "What do they want from us?" I pulled up the digital copy of the letter on my central monitor, mouthing the words perfectly in sync, as Diane read them out loud to her panicking family. To the current residents of the estate. Apex Restructuring has completed its preliminary audit of your acquired financial portfolio. We have documented multiple instances of severe mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and the submission of forged asset declarations to secure luxury lending capital. As the legal holders of your debt, we are obligated to turn these findings over to federal authorities for immediate criminal prosecution. I heard Savannah let out a sharp, terrified gasp. Andre cursed loudly, the reality of federal prison finally breaking through his arrogant exterior. "Keep reading," Andre ordered, his voice shaking. "There has to be a demand. Corporate firms like this do not just send a letter to say you are going to jail. They want a buyout. Read the rest." Diane cleared her throat, her voice cracking as she read the next paragraph. "However, Apex Restructuring recognizes that federal litigation is costly and time-consuming. We are willing to offer a one-time, highly confidential negotiation settlement. If you agree to surrender all remaining physical assets to our firm without contest, we will permanently seal the audit and decline to forward the criminal evidence to the authorities." "Oh my God," Savannah sobbed, a wave of profound relief washing over her words. "They want to settle. Mom, they want to settle. We just have to give them the house and we do not go to jail. We can sign it over and figure the rest out later. Just take the deal. I have to meet them in person to sign the non-disclosure agreements." Diane said, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and utter confusion. "They want to send their lead acquisition director to meet with me directly to finalize the settlement," when Andre asked urgently. "Tell them we will meet them right now. We need this resolved before the party tomorrow night. I cannot have federal agents crashing the vow renewal." There was a long pause on the audio feed. I smiled, a slow, icy expression that matched the cold blue light of the command center monitors. "That is the problem," Diane whispered, sounding completely bewildered. "Look at the meeting details." I listened to the rustle of the heavy corporate stationery as Andre snatched the paper from her hands. "This makes absolutely no sense," Andre muttered. "Why would a corporate restructuring firm schedule a legal settlement meeting at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night?" "Because they know exactly what we are doing," Diane replied, her voice filled with a sudden creeping dread. I stared at the screen, admiring the flawless execution of the trap. The meeting was indeed scheduled for 8 o'clock on Saturday night, but it was not scheduled at a corporate office or a sterile legal firm or a bank branch. The meeting location designated on the formal Apex letterhead was the exact same luxury hotel where Savannah and Andre were hosting their vow renewal. I had specifically requested the private executive suite located directly adjacent to the grand ballroom. I had orchestrated it so that the lead acquisition director of the firm holding their lives hostage would be standing just on the other side of the wall while they cut their expensive cake and gave their fake speeches. "They are coming to the hotel," Diane said, the panic rising rapidly in her throat. The letter says their representative will arrive at 8:15 sharp. If we are not in the executive suite to sign the settlement papers by 8:30, the offer is permanently revoked and the federal warrants will be triggered automatically. Then we go, Andre said firmly. We host the party. We smile, we take the photos, we impress the investors. And when the cocktail hour starts, we slip out, the side door, go into the executive suite, sign whatever paperwork this suit demands, and we walk away completely clean. We can handle one corporate pencil pusher. I took off my headset and leaned back in my chair. Andre still thought he was playing a standard game of corporate leverage. He thought he could just charm his way out of federal fraud charges with a firm handshake and a signature. He had absolutely no idea that the corporate pencil pusher walking into that executive suite tomorrow night was the same woman he had physically threatened and thrown out into the freezing rain 4 months ago. The stage was perfectly set. The bait was taken. Now it was time to get dressed for the party. Saturday night arrived with an electric, almost suffocating tension in the air. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite of the penthouse, staring at the woman looking back at me. I was no longer the shivering, terrified victim Diane had thrown out onto a freezing porch 4 months ago. Caroline had brought in a private tailor to fit me in a razor-sharp charcoal gray designer suit. It was the kind of garment that radiated absolute authority and cold, unapproachable power. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, severe style. I looked exactly like what I had become. I was the executioner of their financial empire. Caroline stood beside me wearing an equally intimidating black silk suit. Behind us stood 3 of her top corporate litigators. These were not local small-town defense attorneys. They were ruthless, high-powered corporate sharks who specialized in hostile takeovers and federal fraud prosecution. They carried thick, locked leather briefcases containing every single piece of encrypted evidence I had compiled over the last 90 days. We took the private elevator down to the waiting fleet of black cars. The luxury hotel was bustling with weekend activity, but our group moved through the grand lobby like a localized storm front. People naturally stepped out of our way. We bypassed the main elevators and used the VIP access key Caroline had secured to take a private lift directly to the top floor, where the grand ballroom and the executive suites were located. We stood in the softly lit corridor, just outside the massive double mahogany doors of the ballroom. The vow renewal gala was in full swing. Even through the thick wood, I could hear the gentle, sophisticated melodies of a live string quartet. I could smell the overwhelming, expensive scent of thousands of imported white orchids. They had spent every single dime of that fraudulent $500,000 loan to create an absolute masterpiece of fake wealth. The music faded out, replaced by the sharp tap of a finger against a microphone. Diane's voice echoed through the high-end audio system, booming across the ballroom and filtering out into the hallway. I held up a hand, signaling my legal team to wait. I wanted to hear exactly how she was spinning her web of lies to her wealthy friends before I tore it all down. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," Diane began. Her voice was dripping with that sickly sweet manufactured warmth she perfected for the country club. As I look around this room, my heart is just so incredibly full. This year has been uniquely challenging for our family. We have faced trials that would have broken lesser people. We have endured a painful, devastating betrayal from someone we trusted, someone we brought into our home and loved as our own flesh and blood. A collective sympathetic murmur rippled through the crowd of 200 elite guests. They all knew exactly who she was talking about. They had all seen her viral videos. She was milking my supposed grand larceny for every ounce of social sympathy she could extract. But family resilience is a beautiful thing, Diane continued, her voice swelling with dramatic triumph. Savannah and Andre have shown us all what true strength looks like. Despite the financial attacks and the emotional trauma inflicted upon us, they have emerged stronger, more successful, and more in love than ever before. So please raise your expensive glasses to my beautiful daughter and her incredible husband. I heard the clinking of crystal glasses and the polite applause of the crowd. Through the narrow crack between the doors, I could see Savannah and Andre standing at the center of the dance floor. They were smiling brightly, holding a silver knife together, preparing to cut into a massive $5,000 tiered cake. I turned to the two litigators standing closest to the doors. "Now," I said quietly. The litigators reached out and pushed the heavy mahogany doors wide open. They did not open them quietly or politely. They shoved them open with enough force that the brass handles slammed loudly against the interior walls. The resounding crash echoed like a gunshot across the cavernous, opulent room. The polite applause died instantly. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. 200 heads snapped toward the entrance in perfect unison. I stepped over the threshold and walked right into the ballroom. Caroline flanked me on my right, the litigators trailing just a half step behind us. We moved in a tight, impenetrable formation down the center aisle of the ballroom, walking straight across the custom white silk carpet they had rented for the occasion. The room was a breathtaking display of stolen money. Giant crystal chandeliers cast a glittering light over the terrified faces of the guests. I saw my Aunt Susan drop her champagne flute. It shattered on the floor, spilling expensive wine across the shoes of the person next to her. But nobody moved. The silence was absolute heavy and completely suffocating. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead. Savannah froze with the silver cake knife suspended in mid-air, her jaw practically unhinging as she stared at me. All the manufactured color drained from Andre's face, leaving him looking sickly and entirely panicked. He recognized the corporate lawyers immediately. He knew exactly what kind of men carried briefcases like that. But Diane's reaction was the most visceral. She was standing on the small elevated stage near the cake, still holding the wireless microphone. She stared at me as if a ghost had just walked out of the walls. Her eyes darted from me to the severe-looking lawyers, and then to Caroline. For a split second, I saw genuine, unadulterated terror flash across her features as she realized I was not hiding in a Mexican border town. I was right here, and I was not alone. But true to her nature, Diane's terror instantly mutated into explosive defensive rage. She could not process the reality of the situation, so she defaulted to the only tactic she knew. She dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a deafening high-pitched screech of audio feedback that made several guests wince and cover their ears. "Security!" Diane screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with absolute hysteria. "Hotel security, get in here right now! Arrest her! This woman is a fugitive! She is a convicted thief and she is trespassing on private property. Get her out of my sight and call the police." I did not stop walking. I did not flinch at her screaming. I simply stopped 5 feet away from the massive tiered cake, crossed my arms over my charcoal suit, and gave her a cold, entirely merciless smile. Let them call the police, I thought. That is exactly who we brought the evidence for. I did not wait for the hotel security to arrive. I did not raise my voice to match Diane's hysterical screaming. I simply bypassed the stunned guests on the dance floor and walked straight toward the elevated audio-visual table set up in the corner of the room. The young DJ hired to play their romantic background music took one look at the 3 imposing corporate litigators flanking me and immediately took his hands off the mixing board. He took several steps back, his eyes wide, raising his hands in absolute surrender. I reached into my leather briefcase, pulled out my encrypted titanium iPad, and plugged the auxiliary display cable directly into the primary projector feed. The massive 20-foot projection screen mounted behind the stage instantly flickered. The looping, high-definition slideshow of Savannah and Andre posing on tropical beaches and kissing in front of the Tudor house vanished. In its place, the stark, glaring white background of a federal financial ledger illuminated the dark ballroom. The sheer size of the projected documents made the numbers impossible to ignore. I picked up the spare wireless microphone resting on the DJ table and switched it on. My voice resonated through the high-end speakers, calm, measured, and absolutely lethal. "You are all drinking imported champagne and eating a $5,000 cake," I announced to the silent, captive audience. "I think it is only fair that you know exactly who paid for it, because it was not my sister, and it certainly was not her husband." I tapped the screen of my iPad. The first document flashed onto the wall. It was the fraudulent loan application they had submitted 3 days ago. "There are the digital signatures of Diane Savannah and Andre," I said, my voice echoing across the cavernous ballroom. "They signed sworn legal affidavits pledging the family estate as collateral to secure a $500,000 line of credit to pay for this exact party. The only problem is that Diane defaulted on her mortgages months ago. She does not own that house anymore. She pledged stolen collateral, committing federal mortgage fraud and wire fraud just to impress every single person standing in this room tonight." The wealthy guests began to murmur. I saw several prominent local business owners pull out their reading glasses, squinting at the massive screen to verify the digital signatures for themselves. Diane stood on the stage, her mouth opening and closing in silent shock, as her meticulously crafted lie was exposed in unforgiving high definition. I tapped the screen again. A new spreadsheet appeared highlighting Savannah's corporate accounts. "Savannah likes to tell you all that she is a thriving entrepreneur," I continued ruthlessly. "But right now you are looking at the 40% interest payday loans she took out to keep her defunct skincare brand from collapsing. When those predatory lenders cut her off, she used her husband's administrative passwords to siphon hundreds of thousands of dollars directly from his private venture capital investor accounts." A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. I knew several of Andre's actual investors were sitting at the VIP tables right in front of the stage. Men in expensive suits were already pulling out their cell phones, their faces turning red with fury. But before Andre could even attempt to open his mouth to defend himself to his clients, I delivered the fatal blow. I tapped the screen one final time. The Cayman Islands offshore routing numbers appeared, highlighting the staggering $3 million balance. And Andre did not report his wife for the theft, because if he invited a federal audit into his firm, the authorities would find this, I declared. $3 million of his client's money secretly wired into an offshore account in his name alone. He was preparing to liquidate his remaining domestic assets and completely flee the country, leaving his wife and my mother to take the fall for the entire financial collapse. Savannah spun around so fast, she nearly tripped over the hem of her expensive designer gown. She stared at the massive numbers on the wall, her face twisting from shock into pure, unhinged fury. She did not know about the offshore accounts. She had genuinely believed they were completely broke when she was sobbing over her repossessed vehicle. $3 million! Savannah screamed, her voice cracking as she lunged at her husband. "You had $3 million hidden away while I was getting my car towed in the middle of a country club parking lot. You were going to leave me." She began hitting Andre in the chest with her fists, entirely abandoning any semblance of dignity in front of her high society friends. Andre grabbed her wrists frantically, whispering at her to stop making a scene, but the damage was irreversible. Their perfect, wealthy marriage was violently shattering live on stage. But Diane was a different kind of monster. She had spent 30 years controlling every narrative, and she simply refused to accept public defeat. She marched over to the microphone she had dropped on the stage floor, picked it up, and glared at me with a hatred so venomous it was almost palpable. "Do not look at those screens," Diane commanded the crowd, her voice dripping with desperate arrogance. "Do not believe a single word this woman says." She pointed a trembling finger at me across the ballroom. "She is a master manipulator. She is an accountant. She literally fabricates financial documents for a living. She made all of this up to ruin our family because she is a bitter, jealous orphan who could never measure up to my real daughter." Diane stepped to the edge of the stage, sneering down at me with absolute contempt. "You think you can just walk in here with an iPad and scare us, Blair? You think a few fake spreadsheets mean anything to these people? You are a broke, suspended fugitive hiding from a grand larceny warrant. You have absolutely no money, no power, and no legal standing. You cannot prove a single piece of this garbage in a real court of law because you cannot even afford a decent lawyer to keep yourself out of federal prison." Diane stood there, her chest heaving, a triumphant smirk beginning to form on her lips as she waited for me to crumble under her verbal assault. She genuinely believed her own delusion. She thought her sheer volume and country club confidence, could somehow overwrite the massive federal crimes projected on the wall behind her. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice to defend my honor. I simply smiled, took half a step back, and held the wireless microphone out to my right. Caroline stepped forward. The transition of power in the room was instantaneous and absolute. Caroline did not rush. She moved with the terrifying, unhurried grace of an apex predator who had finally cornered her prey. She wore a tailored black silk suit that cost more than Diane's entire vow renewal catering budget, and her pale blue eyes were locked onto Diane with a cold, piercing intensity that literally made my adoptive mother take a physical step backward on the stage. Caroline took the microphone from my hand. When she spoke, her voice did not echo with the shrill, frantic desperation Diane had just displayed. It was smooth, rich, and cut through the dead silence of the ballroom like a freshly sharpened blade. "You are entirely correct about one thing." Diane Caroline began, projecting her voice effortlessly across the room of 200 stunned guests. "Blair did not have the financial resources to hire a defense attorney, because she did not need one. She has a team of them, and I brought them with me." Diane stared at Caroline, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Who are you?" Diane demanded, though her voice wavered noticeably. "Are you her lawyer? I demand you leave this private event immediately." Caroline let out a soft, humorless laugh that sent a visible chill through the front row of the audience. "My name is Caroline," she said clearly. "Some of the gentlemen sitting at the VIP tables might recognize my name from the board of directors of the international real estate conglomerate that owns this very hotel. But tonight, I am here representing a much smaller, highly specialized subsidiary. I am the CEO and sole proprietor of Apex Restructuring." The color instantly drained from Diane's face, leaving her skin a sickly ashen gray. The heavy realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. The anonymous corporate entity holding the deed to her house, the company threatening to send her to federal prison, the firm she was supposed to meet in the adjacent executive suite in exactly 10 minutes to surrender all her assets. It was not some faceless bureaucracy. It was the woman standing right in front of her. "You?" Diane whispered, the microphone catching the ragged sound of her breathing. "You bought our debt." "I bought every single dime of it," Caroline confirmed coldly. "But I am not just a corporate restructuring executive, Diane. I am also the sole executor of my late father's estate, and more importantly, I am Blair's biological mother." A collective audible gasp swept through the ballroom. The wealthy socialites, the country club board members, the people Diane had spent 3 decades manipulating with her tragic tales of adopting a broken, unwanted child, all stared at Caroline in absolute shock. 34 years ago, Caroline continued, turning slightly to address the massive crowd. "I employed a very desperate, highly unethical administrative assistant. She was drowning in debt and looking for a quick payout. So she forged my signature on a set of confidential medical documents, bypassed a private agency, and legally kidnapped my infant daughter from a private maternity ward." Diane dropped her hands to her sides, her whole body shaking violently. "That is a lie," she choked out, looking desperately out at her friends in the crowd. "Do not listen to her. I adopted Blair legally. I gave her a wonderful life. I saved her. You saved your own bank account." Caroline snapped, her voice finally rising with decades of suppressed fury. "You used my daughter as a human hostage to secure a lifetime under-the-table payout from my father's blind trust. You built this entire pathetic, fake, wealthy existence using the hush money you extorted. And you knew that the second Blair turned 35, that monthly stipend would completely disappear." Caroline pointed directly at the massive spreadsheet projected on the wall. "You knew the trust would transfer $50 million of principal capital directly into Blair's control in exactly 3 months. But you also knew the trust contained a strict morality clause. If Blair was convicted of a felony, the $50 million would default to you, her legal guardian. So you framed her. You orchestrated a massive embezzlement scheme to cover up your son-in-law's offshore wire fraud, and you tried to send your own daughter to a federal penitentiary just so you could steal her inheritance. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the hum of the projector fan. Savannah was staring at Diane, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. Andre looked physically ill, staring at the $50 million figure Caroline had just announced, likely realizing he had thrown away a connection to a billionaire empire just to protect his pathetic $3 million offshore stash. Diane looked around the room, her eyes wide and panicked. She was searching for a single friendly face, a single person who would stand up and defend her honor. But the wealthy elite she had spent her entire life worshipping were looking at her with absolute unmasked disgust. The illusion was dead. The saintly mother routine was completely destroyed. Caroline stepped right up to the very edge of the elevated stage, closing the distance between herself and the woman who had stolen her child. She did not yell. She spoke with a quiet, lethal finality that resonated through every corner of the grand ballroom. "You stole my daughter 34 years ago," Caroline said, looking dead into Diane's terrified eyes. "Today, I am taking everything you own." The absolute finality of Caroline's words hung in the dead air of the ballroom for only a fraction of a second before the entire illusion violently shattered. The silence broke, replaced by the frantic, chaotic murmuring of 200 wealthy guests, realizing they had just been made accomplices to a massive federal crime. Andre was the first to snap. He was a creature of pure calculating opportunism. Facing the terrifying reality of federal wire fraud charges, the total loss of his stolen domestic capital, and the looming threat of my corporate litigators digging into his Cayman Islands accounts, survival instincts entirely overrode his fake marriage vows. I watched his eyes dart from the glowing financial spreadsheets projected on the wall to the severe faces of my lawyers and finally to his wife. Savannah reached a trembling hand out toward him, her face stained with running mascara and tears of pure panic. "Andre, do something," she pleaded, her voice a pathetic high-pitched whine. "Tell them it is a mistake." Andre did not comfort her. He recoiled from her touch as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. He took 2 large steps away from her, reaching into the breast pocket of his custom Italian suit. He pulled out his sleek smartphone. He bypassed the facial recognition typed in his complex passcode with shaking fingers and walked straight past his sobbing wife. He approached the tallest corporate litigator standing to my left. "I want immunity," Andre stated. His voice was completely devoid of the smooth, arrogant charm he used to woo venture capital investors just an hour ago. He held his unlocked phone out like a white flag of surrender. "I have the text messages. I have digital proof that Savannah orchestrated the fraudulent loan on the house. I have her written admission that she bypassed my 2-factor authentication to steal my investor capital. She forged my signature on the secondary loan documents. I will turn over everything and testify to all of it if you leave my offshore accounts out of the federal indictment." The litigator looked down at the phone, then back up at Andre with an expression of absolute surgical disgust. "We do not negotiate plea deals," the lawyer replied coldly, snatching the phone from Andre's hand and dropping it into an evidence bag. "But the federal prosecutor who receives this will certainly note your cooperation. Stand against the wall and do not move." Savannah heard the entire exchange. Her brain simply could not process the magnitude of the betrayal. Her loving, wealthy husband had just handed over the digital key to lock her in a federal prison cell for the next 20 years to save his own skin. She let out an ear-piercing, guttural scream that echoed violently off the high ceilings of the ballroom. She spun around, her wild, furious eyes landing on the true architect of her destruction. Diane was still standing near the tiered cake, frozen in place, her mouth hanging open as she realized her country club empire had been completely reduced to ash. "This is your fault," Savannah shrieked, charging across the elevated stage. She lunged at Diane, grabbing the older woman by the delicate silk shoulders of her expensive evening gown. "You ruined my life. You brought her into this house. You told me we were safe. You told me Blair was just a worthless stray we could use. You committed a felony 34 years ago to feed your own pathetic greed, and you dragged me straight down to hell with you." Diane, driven by pure narcissistic rage, immediately shoved her golden child away. "Do not speak to me like that," Diane screamed back, her face twisting into an ugly, hateful mask. "I gave you everything. I bought you that fake business. I paid for this ridiculous party. You are nothing but a useless, incompetent parasite who could not even manage to steal money correctly." Savannah retaliated, swinging her arms wildly. She shoved Diane hard in the chest. Diane stumbled backward in her high heels, her arms flailing as she crashed directly into the display table holding the $5,000 custom-tiered cake. The massive dessert toppled over. Heavy layers of white fondant vanilla sponge and imported orchids crashed onto the polished wooden floor, splattering expensive frosting all over Diane's designer dress. Diane scrambled in the mess, screaming obscenities at her own daughter, while Savannah stood over her hysterically crying and hurling cake plates across the stage. I stood there and watched the empire burn to the ground. I looked out at the 200 elite guests. They were not intervening. They were not rushing to help the saintly mother or comfort the beautiful bride. They were acting like spectators at a blood sport. Half the room had their smartphones out, the glowing screens capturing every single second of the pathetic, violent brawl. The great untouchable Diane was crawling in cake frosting, publicly exposed as a kidnapper and a fraud, while her golden child shrieked like a maniac, and her son-in-law cowered against a wall waiting for the authorities. For my entire life, they had demanded absolute perfection from me. They had forced me to shrink, to apologize for my existence, and to endlessly cater to their fragile egos under the threat of being thrown out. Now, the second the stolen money disappeared, they were tearing each other apart like starving animals. I did not feel sad for them. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or guilt. I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of liberation. The invisible chains that had choked me for 3 decades simply dissolved into thin air. I looked at Caroline. She was watching the carnage with a look of cold, grim satisfaction. She turned her head and met my eyes, offering me a small, genuine smile of absolute solidarity. "We are done here," I said quietly. I turned my back on the stage. I did not look over my shoulder as Diane began to wail. I walked straight down the center of the white silk carpet, my designer heels clicking in a steady, perfect rhythm. The crowd of wealthy guests actively parted for me, stepping hastily out of my way, as if I commanded the room, and for the first time in my life, I truly did. I pushed through the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom and stepped out into the quiet, softly lit corridor of the hotel. I heard the sharp ding of the elevator bell at the far end of the hall. The polished metal doors slid open. A dozen uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes federal agents stepped out, their heavy boots thudding against the carpet and their radios crackling in the quiet lobby. I did not stay to watch the handcuffs click into place. As the federal agents flooded into the grand ballroom to execute their warrants, I walked out of the hotel, stepping into the crisp, cool night air with a profound sense of absolute peace. The local news cycle over the next few days was relentless. The scandal completely rocked the wealthy suburbs. Andre was indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud and held without bail. Savannah, suddenly penniless and facing her own conspiracy charges, moved into a cheap motel, her luxury lifestyle completely evaporated. And Diane, stripped of her stolen trust fund and her fraudulent credit lines, was left with absolutely nothing. Exactly 1 week later, I drove my car through the familiar winding streets of the upscale neighborhood where I had spent my entire childhood. I did not go there to gloat, but I needed to see the final chapter close with my own 2 eyes. I pulled up to the curb just across the street from the sprawling Tudor house. The pristine, manicured lawn was now littered with heavy black plastic trash bags. The bank had not wasted a single second. Because Apex Restructuring held the defaulted deed and had formally triggered the foreclosure protocol, Diane was given a mandatory eviction notice. She had exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine idling quietly, and watched through the tinted glass. Diane was struggling to carry two overstuffed garbage bags down the front steps. She was not wearing designer silk or expensive pearls. She wore stained sweatpants and an old, tattered sweater. The wealthy neighbors, the exact same people who had pulled their curtains closed and ignored me when I was freezing on that porch 4 months ago, were now standing openly in their driveways, whispering and watching Diane's humiliating exit. She dropped the bags onto the concrete driveway, wiping sweat and dirt from her forehead. As she looked up, her eyes locked onto my car. Even through the tinted windows, she recognized me. I watched the realization hit her, followed immediately by a frantic, desperate surge of energy. She practically sprinted across the wet grass, abandoning her garbage bags, and ran right up to the passenger side of my vehicle. She slapped her palms against the glass, her face contorted in a pathetic mask of manufactured grief. I reached over and pressed the button to lower the window just a few inches. "Blair, please," Diane sobbed, gripping the edge of the glass with her dirt-stained fingers. "Please, you have to stop this. You have the power to call off the lawyers. I have nowhere to go. My friends will not even answer my phone calls. I am your mother. I raised you in this beautiful home. I fed you the best food. I clothed you when nobody else wanted you. You cannot just throw me out onto the street like a piece of garbage. We are family." I looked at the woman who had tormented me for 3 decades. I searched my heart for a single ounce of sympathy, a lingering shred of the childhood obligation I used to feel. But there was absolutely nothing left. The psychological hold she had over me was completely broken. She was just a desperate, greedy stranger facing the exact consequences of her own horrific actions. I looked her dead in the eye, my voice perfectly level and cold as ice. "You did not raise me, Diane," I replied, enunciating every single word so she would never forget them. "You held me hostage for a payday, and your time is up." I did not wait for her to formulate another lie. I pushed the button, rolling the window up smoothly until it sealed shut, completely cutting off the sound of her frantic, muffled screaming. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving her standing alone in the driveway, surrounded by trash bags exactly where she belonged. I never looked back. The last 4 months of my life had been a brutal, terrifying gauntlet. I was thrown out into a freezing rainstorm, stripped of my career, framed for a massive federal crime, and forced to completely rebuild my reality from the ground up. But sitting in my quiet, secure apartment later that evening, I realized I did not just survive the ordeal. I weaponized my trauma. I used my intellect, my forensic training, and my absolute refusal to be a victim to protect myself and dismantle a toxic empire. My relationship with Caroline did not magically transform into a perfect mother and daughter dynamic overnight. We had 34 years of stolen time to make up for, and we were both fiercely independent, stubborn women. But we built a foundation on mutual respect, shared intellect, and an undeniable, powerful bond. When my 35th birthday finally arrived, the massive trust fund unlocked, just as Caroline had promised. But I did not use the money to buy luxury cars or country club memberships. Instead, Caroline and I partnered together to launch a philanthropic financial firm based right in the heart of Chicago. We employ a specialized team of forensic accountants, corporate litigators, and private investigators. Our sole mission is to help women who are trapped in cycles of financial abuse. We track hidden assets, we break predatory debt structures, and we give victims the absolute financial firepower they need to escape toxic environments and rebuild their lives on their own terms. Every time I sit across the desk from a woman who has been told she is worthless, trapped, or entirely alone, I see the reflection of the girl I used to be. And I show them exactly how to take their power back. Sometimes, the family you thought you owed your life to is the one holding the knife. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to save yourself? Drop your story in the comments. Like and subscribe if you believe the best revenge isn't violence, it's unshakable, untouchable success.